Hey, everybody. I'm Dave Eddy. I'm the Director of Training Operations for the International Homicide Investigators Association and also the host of our Flint to Flame interview series. It's a pleasure for me to be here on this episode to interview Detective Sergeant Matt Ingrouille of the Saskatoon Police Service in Saskatchewan, Canada. In a moment, I'm going to have Matt introduce himself to us. But I want to just explain briefly what the Flint to Flame series is, if this is your first experience with it. So about 2 years ago, we created. We found a need. We felt to highlight some of our various contacts that we've made through our organization and through the different things that we have done, and what the unique stories of some of the people that we've come across. Of course, our organization is an investigative training organization. And so in the process of doing what we do, we come across individuals who not only have a unique story as it relates to investigative acumen and what they're doing on the public safety side and investigative side, but we often discover that those same individuals have a whole lot more to say and do in their efforts to make the world a better place, even outside of their public safety career. And Matt Ingrouille is one of those individuals. We started about 2 years ago with Martin Engard from the Copenhagen Police with the very first interview we did. And what kind of drove the name and the reason, Matt, I don't know if you knew this or not, but the Flint to Flame kind of came about from a single flint stone doesn't make a spark, doesn't do anything until it comes in contact with another stone. And so we kind of felt that this highlights the concept that we're talking about with these interviews by professionals and investigators and other people in public safety and other professional organizations around the world. When we come into contact with one another, it's then that we can really start to see some learning and some leadership and some of those things that really can spark conversation and spark efforts to make the world a better place, as I said. And so we really feel that through these interviews, not only can we learn a lot more about the great things that some of the colleagues around the world are doing, but also maybe encourage others to think, hey, what more could I be doing personally to make a difference in the world? So that's kind of the concept behind the Flint to Flame interview series. And so again, it's my privilege on this episode to have the opportunity to talk with Matt Ingrouille of Saskatoon Police Service. So Matt, if you would just take a moment, introduce yourself, and maybe tell us in the process of that a little bit about Saskatoon. Where is it? How big? What's kind of the story going on there in Saskatoon?
Sure. Well, thanks a lot for having me, Dave. This is a complete honor. Like I said to you before, that you would even ask, to talk to me about some of my experiences. So I'm very honored to be here. I like that you went with Flint to Flame because your original name, which I think you said was Dave's Bromance or something like that. I'm glad to see you moved on from there. Um, because I know you are making a lot of romances as you're traveling around, and
It's true.
the irony is when you do find like-minded individuals that are sort of or have a calling into this profession, but then not only did you get here um and see everything and experience everything, but you actually kind of develop a passion to make some positive changes for the generations under you. So um yeah, I again, thanks very much. I've been a police officer for 20 years in Saskatoon. I've done my whole career here. I'm currently a detective sergeant in our homicide unit, and I've been there for a few years now. Before that, I was promoted into our serious assault unit, so it was under the major crimes umbrella. And essentially, we just did everything except for homicides. Although I did do some homicide investigations there as well, because some of those victims of the violent assaults eventually did succumb to their injuries, and then we did continue those investigations as well. So that's kind of where my career's at currently. But the vast majority of my career has really been, I developed a passion early on for sort of the drugs and organized crime sort of proponents. And I worked in our organized crime section, which was integrated with the RCMP. for quite some time, and that took me to travel the country a little bit and really sort of get exposure to the drug trade in a way that many police officers don't get that exposure. Kind of the high, I say that was kind of I got to work in the highest level of the drug trade that we're funded to investigate. Um, and then I also did some time back in patrol, working in our core neighborhoods, really in our most challenging districts is kind of where I like to be, where people are really struggling and where I feel like I can offer a service to them in their time of crisis. And I also spent some time in our guns and gangs unit. And there I was kind of working at the bottom end of the drug trade there, where our gang situation in Saskatoon, it's predominantly indigenous based gangs. So a lot of youth gangs. It's very violent. They're people that typically have, you'd be lucky if you could find some grade 8 education in there. Um, their their uh, their family dynamics are quite heart wrenching most of the times when you actually start talking to some of these gang members and what they've been through in their life.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, it breeds people with nothing to lose and a value system that's flawed, and so it just sort of leads to a lot of violence. So that's kind of my professional life, I suppose, in a way. I'm a father of four. I have a 23-year-old son. I'm a grandfather to a little 2-year-old as well, even though I'm only in my early 40s. So that was a surprise to us all, but an exciting one. And then I have three little girls aged 13, 10, and 7.
Oh, that's great. Uh, and I had missed those details in the busyness. Last time we were together, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, the last time we were together was in at an event we did in collaboration with the Ontario Provincial Police in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and you were one of our presenters. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. I will point that out. That some of the questions will uh, uh, early on will be about the case that you presented, because those other things that you talked about and the things that draw you, from an internal, kind of your why. What's your why for doing what you do? The things that you've already kind of highlighted or alluded to, some of the things that drive you, and that case study, fascinating case study. Of course, like so many other case studies that we are involved with, or cases that we're involved with in this line of work. Tragic situations that lead to um, hopefully in a best case scenario, finding justice and finding the truth for surviving families and loved ones, but also the opportunity that it gives us to show or highlight how to do things um, uh, correctly, or to do the best of our ability to do things correctly and do things right by the victim, by the family, by the survivors, to find that truth and find that justice. And it was a tireless effort. And I'm not gonna talk more about it now, because I'm gonna ask you to get to that. But you alluded to some of the other parts, and you wrapped up your introduction with your personal side, and we have that in common. I'm also a grandfather. I'm a bit older than you, as probably is obvious on the screen. But having said that, you kind of dipped into the personal side. So I want to make sure that our viewers do understand. While we will be talking about some of the work that you do and your outstanding efforts as a law enforcement professional, we're going to talk about some personal things too, and from a personal perspective. And I'm sure that for the benefit of our viewers, it's important that they understand some of the things that we each talk about are from our own position, our own perspective, not representing the organization necessarily that we are employed with, or that. So, with that said, thank you for that introduction. How big of a municipality is Saskatoon, Matt?
Yeah, so Saskatoon has a population of around 300,000 people. We're in the prairies of Saskatchewan, so it's right in the center. If you're looking at the map of Canada, we're basically smack dab in the middle of flat open prairies. We just finished our, what is the date today? April. Oh, it's May 1st.
May
It's May
1st.
1st. Yep. So last week we just finished our fifth winter cycle, I would say, and the snow finally just started to melt. It was a long winter this year, and right when we thought that spring was coming, we just got another winter. So you can tell that my complexion, this is my winter paleness, and obviously where you are, you're exposed to a lot more sun. So hopefully your filters can edit some color to my face. So yeah, that's Saskatchewan. It's a really cool environment to work and live in, because I think our weather systems are so extreme that it sort of breeds a lot of character into the people that live here, because we're very community orientated, I find, compared to a lot of other cities and places that I've visited. And there's a strong arts culture, there's good food, things of that nature that maybe you wouldn't expect kind of in a vast open prairie landscape. But we have a lot to offer, so I welcome anyone watching. Consider coming to Saskatchewan if you're ever traveling the country.
Well, I'm definitely gonna pay a visit at some point. Of course, I'm a huge hockey fan, so I know Canada is the original point of hockey. Of course, I'm from Michigan, so I have to be a Red Wings fan, and it's been a bit of a drought the last 10 years, but we're on the uphill swing there, I think. But I'll look forward to coming up there. And I chuckled at the point about the weather, because I'm from lower Michigan, the lower part of the mitten. So the weather tends to be a little bit milder, more Midwest climate. But I spent a fair amount of time in the Upper Peninsula, which is pretty much Canada. It's just on the other side of Lake
Right.
Superior, right across from Thunder Bay, I think. And it's so there's a lot of this similarities to what you mentioned with the multiple winters that come through just when you least expect it, or you think things are looking up, and very long winters, and that does create not only that community aspect, but I think in some cases, because of the long winters and not an awful lot of other things to do, it can create some problems with mental health. It can create some problems with people not finding constructive use of their time, and so they do things that aren't so constructive with their time. And I think that probably some of what you're going to talk about is going to dip into that. So um, let me just kind of kick into and thank you for all of that too, by the way. But let me, you talked about your background in organized crime, and the violent crime unit, and the gang unit. It seems like you get involved in an awful lot of other things. And if I think when we talked in Niagara Falls, we learned this about one another, that neither one of us sits still too well. I'm supposed to be retired, and it turns out I'm almost as busy as I was when I was working full time. But you get into a lot of things. I'm really interested in your advocacy work. I know you do some other podcasts. Besides your day job as a homicide investigator and finder of truth. Obviously, you're a doer, and you're a doer, and not a sitter, or a passive participant. You jump right in and do things, and I don't know how anybody couldn't respect that. But what's been on your mind recently, when you consider all the different things that you do, and that you have your hands in, and that you do to occupy your time? What's been on your mind recently? Let's say maybe the last couple of years, because I think we talked about this briefly in Niagara Falls.
Um, yeah, there's a few things for sure. I think as a policing profession, I think there's a growing need for some more professionalization of what we do, and just to kind of create some standards, because there's such a wide range of service, from police service to police service all throughout North America, and some standardized training. That's why I really feel really fortunate for the conferences I've got to go that IHIA hosts, because the quality of training is definitely uh, to a level that isn't often seen in other places. But So that's definitely one, and I'm finding that the longer I'm here, the harder these investigating investigations are becoming, and they're not getting harder because necessarily the sophistication of the crimes or anything's changing, because the reality is there's actually more evidence being left at crime scenes now, I would say, than there was 10, 15 years ago with technological advancements and everything. But the ability for us to do our job, this is the systemic barriers that are being put in place, especially in Canada, is definitely a challenge that I think police officers and detectives in particular are really struggling to navigate. It seems like in Canada we're needing warrants to do things that we didn't need a warrant for, and and I believe in privacy. I'm a private person, and I like to I want to make sure that nobody's rights are infringed upon. But it just seems like there's been some rulings in the courts and interpretations of some of the law that is sort of, I feel like, maybe losing the plot a little bit. That this isn't a legal system; it's supposed to be a justice system. And are we maybe putting some of these principles in front of the people and the human beings that this system is here to protect and to work with?
Yeah, that's a great, so many great points in there. Thank you for that, and I love that comparison: justice system versus legal system, and the emphasis on standards. And I don't think it's so much different. North America as a whole, Canada, United States. There is. Uh, I love the point you made, because we think in terms of investigations now, how much more solvable they are because of the advancements in technology, because of the exponential developments in DNA. The investigative genetic genealogy, that's been on the scene just only since about 2018 ish, for our purposes, and using those advancements. But what struck me the most, and because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and it has been since I became involved in this organization, and in the organizations I've been a part of before, is the professionalizing the profession. Right? We do want to be. That's what I usually open up with at every event that I'm a facilitator for. Is we're the IHIA is a professional organization whose mission is to train professional investigators. It has to be viewed that way, in my opinion, so that we have the right context, and we have the right motivation for what we're doing. Anybody and any organization can go out and train people and make them better at what they do potentially, but to do it in a way that's professionalizing the profession, so that when those individuals go back to their office and their jobs, they can then take that and apply it in a professional manner, and thus elevate the entire profession.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
we have gone through some bumpy roads, and there are that whole we come from a generation probably that this phrase "one bad apple spoils the bunch" is probably familiar to people our age. Kids would probably scratch their heads and go, what's that guy talking about?" But there are some bad apples, right? There are some people who don't have the best interest, or maybe they get into this line of work for the wrong motivation, and that's the thing that intrigues me, and really one of the things I early on respected you for in our early conversations in Niagara, was that you do take it seriously, your calling to
Hmm.
this profession, and not only do you just take that calling seriously to do it in a professional and respectful manner, but you then are transparent enough as an individual to allow your who you are as a person outside of your vocation to influence your vocation, which I think is huge, because we tend to get into silos, and we want to compartmentalize our lives, and not only is, I think, in my opinion, does it make you a better investigator when you can um, take your personal experience and use that to feed your professional experience. But I think it makes you a more compassionate and caring individual. So, um, with that in mind, in our line of work, we do see a lot of unpleasantries. We see a lot of the worst of society, um, and how it kind of repeats itself in communities. You even mentioned that sometimes this there's flawed value systems that are a result of the environment a person is stuck in, sometimes with no fault of their own. What do you see in the community where you serve? Maybe to just take that a little bit farther, what you talked about at the beginning, and how does what you do as a professional impact that or drive you to serve in one way or the other, maybe compared to somebody else that you might be in the same profession.
Um, I think one of the most important things that we can do when you're working, essentially a frontline profession like policing, nursing, social work, EMS, fire. If you know that you're gonna be exposed to um, kind of a population that um, most people aren't engaging with every single day, one of the most beneficial things you can do is learn as much about that population and from that population as possible, and building relationships with people so you can kind of really understand why you're seeing certain patterns and why you're seeing certain um, behaviors, or why these issues are seem more complex than they need to be. um, I think is something that maybe good cops do, just because they're curious, good-natured people, and they're interested in what's going on. But for those that aren't, that's where I think a lot of and I've been there too. When you get bogged down with dealing with the same stuff and the same types of people and the frustration, and it's easy to sort of generalize, and it's easy to eventually those generalizations to almost become prejudice in nature. And it's not because that police officer has certain got a black heart and they're an evil human being that got into this, but it's because they're having a hard time understanding, and their brain is having a hard time understanding these patterns because it's so far from their own value set, or it's so far away from the way that they grew up and the decisions they would make. But as soon as you actually uh, start from a lens of let's try to actually understand this, like what's actually happening here, and understanding, well, then it helps you frame it better in a way that's healthier. And it also, if you can define the problem, then you can look for a solution. But unfortunately, too many times we're not defining the appropriate problems because we're nervous to talk about it. In Saskatoon, for instance, we have issues with we've had generations of issues with residential schools and residential school survivors, and we're still policing the impacts of residential schools. And for any of the American listeners that aren't aware, but in Canada we had a residential school system that ran through, where we essentially ripped Indigenous children away from their families and forced them to go to basically to try to turn them white into these residential schools. And of course, they were ran by a lot of religious-based organizations that didn't treat people properly, and there's abuse and just horrific things, plus generations of lost parenting. And so we're still dealing with the aftermath of that, of a traumatized population that's still trying to get their feet. The cultural norms, of our Indigenous brothers and sisters are different and haven't been recognized in our greater Canadian society, as well as they should be. I definitely like seeing the fact that there's been massive changes in the 20 years that I've been in this profession, and we are moving forward. But the more time you take to sort of understand those root causes of the issues, then you can start really framing, okay, I see what the problem is here, and then maybe you can find a solution in there.
Yeah, so much wisdom in there, in those points about that, and it does kind of come down to sometimes asking the right questions, right? Maybe we're asking the wrong questions sometimes, but you made a point early on. I just want to go back to very quickly about because it's gonna feed some of the later discussion we have about morale injuries and also vicarious trauma and vicarious victimization in the profession. You mentioned first responders of all types, and it made me think of I read a book years ago, 30 years ago or more. I think it was by Connie Fletcher. It was called What Cops Know, and it was about about the Chicago police. I think she was the subject of her book, and she was writing about that. But in the book, she made an analogy that was very similar to what you just made, and it's important. I think it's important for our viewers to understand. Most of them will understand because the audience is mainly individuals throughout public safety, first responders. But for those that might be tuning in that don't understand, uh, Connie Fletcher made an analogy about a high rise, about society represented as a high rise building where people reside, and the lower floors were the lowest of society, and the upper floors were the upper crust of society. Low income versus high income, and the only people that get off at every floor or stop at every floor are social workers, public safety, first responders. The people that get on the elevators to go to their floor, they bypass all the other floors and get off at their floor, or they get off on the lower floors and they never see the upper floors. Most people don't understand that. You made a very similar analogy with the things and the people that and the different levels of society that we deal with in this profession. And I think that's important. It's important for people to understand, because that does feed into not only our well-being and our optics on how we look at life, but it also affects those that you talked about, those people that are impacted by the system, impacted by the environment that they've been brought up in, or they can't for whatever reason escape from, right? And how those lead to perhaps some implicit bias on both sides, right? So we'll kind of cover some of that, I think. And if you have any kind of piggyback on that or response, please.
I do love that analogy. I'm gonna have to read that book because I love the thought of the apartment building, and with the crisis that we're dealing, like there's no doubt there's there's a drug crisis. It's been going on for you know generations now. Fentanyl being the main killer happening. But you always notice that addiction rates follow the economics. So if all of a sudden there's a downturn in economics like there is right now, that bottom level of society, or to your example there with the apartment, that first floor has just dropped even lower now. So those people that were already desperate and they were already struggling, they're hit the hardest, and they are now even more desperate. They're struggling even more to survive, and that's where a lot of our resources are drawn to, managing and dealing with those individuals, and it's a very violent and an unfortunate place to end up in. And I think that that pocket of society, the ones that you see that are out, and maybe they have the kind of fentanyl fold, as people refer to it, where they're sort of like bent over on the street. They're slamming needles every day. Those people's floor dropped out even lower when the financial crisis hits. And so the gas prices have an economic impact to us. Our groceries cost more. It costs more to fill our gas. And for those people that were already struggling at the bottom end, now their life has got even more manageable. When you didn't think it could get any worse, for them it has. And so that's why I think for the first time in decades, we're starting to see an increase in violent crime rates in cities in Saskatoon, or in Canada.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I appreciate you kind of tying that all together, because it absolutely is correct, and it really kind of goes into. I went off script a little bit there, but some of the questions that I had for you were related to that. How those policies have been implemented in certain regions, and has there been documented successes, and do you believe that working on prevention, how does crime prevention, how can we make prevention a reality, as police officers, as investigators, because there's been a long time thought out there from a lot of people that prevention, there's a couple different views, right? It does work or it doesn't work, and whose responsibility is prevention. We sometimes, with the pace of the operations tempo of this job, and the things that you talked about, make it such that we wind up being a profession of response rather than prevention. And I don't. How do you feel about that? Do you believe that
Well,
prevention can work?
I believe that I believe that prevention is an area where we need to invest a lot of resources into, obviously, but I might not be popular in saying that. I don't think police officers prevent much of anything. We just move it around. I think our job is to respond to crisis, investigate it, and solve it. And the number one way to prevent violent crime is to solve violent crime. And so people don't realize that when you start analyzing the data, that if you want to prevent violence in your community, the biggest predictor of whether there's going to be more violent crime in your community is if there's currently violent crime in your community. And so that's where I think we need to be investing resources into ensuring that we are solving this violent crime that's occurring, because if you don't, it spreads like an STD through your community. And the same thing happens with addiction. Addiction is a symptom, it's not a cause. And a lot of times we're saying that addiction is a cause of all these problems. Go back one step farther. What led to the addiction? Trauma. You will not find somebody that's addicted to anything that didn't come from a world of trauma. They didn't have something happen to them, or an ongoing subset of things currently still happening to them, that they're struggling to deal with, and that's led them to the addiction. So a lot of times we like to draw that line at, oh, the drugs are the problem, with like the demon drug theory, for example. Fentanyl's the problem. No, fentanyl was a response to the problem. It itself is not the problem. You get rid of fentanyl, don't worry, something else will just take its place, because that's how fentanyl got here in the first place. It just took the place of counterfeit oxys. And so we're often, I think, not taking a look at the broader picture and that the human element to these crises. And as a society, I think we need to shift some of these responsibilities amongst our public systems, and also fund them appropriately to deal with it.
Yeah, that's a great segue to just a little bit more discussion about the kind of that bureaucracy, right? The because uh, I I love the way that you laid that out, because you see that in the prescription drug medications, right? Well, is the drug solving a problem, or is it just treating a symptom, right? And in a way that you've kind of explained the crime in the same way, right? Is there's When you see it here, you got to back up farther and look what was the root cause, what was the start of all of it. And some of that can be transposed over to our side, as employees of the government, right? Public servants or the government, we do run into some bureaucracy sometimes, and sometimes we hate the way things are, but we hate change even more, right? So what have you found to be kind of effective ways to break through the bureaucracy, at least some of the time? And I think a second part to that is going to be about maybe an initiative that you're working on to use some AI with some of the things you're doing within the community. So, what do you think? What have you found to be effective in breaking through the bureaucracy?
Um, Bureaucracy is tough. I mean, we've built these systems. You know, whether it's the criminal justice system, healthcare system, education. We've built these systems, and the incentive, um, the incentive that exists on these systems currently is it feels very protectionist. Let's protect these systems. Whereas I think we almost need to take a little bit of we need to take a little bit of I think well, first we need some courageous leaders in these areas, and we need to learn some lessons from the private sector, where it's very easy for the private sector to know what their incentive is. We make widgets, and if we can sell more widgets, we make more money. And so we identify people within this organization that are the best at both making and selling widgets, and we move them and we get them to teach everybody how to now make and move and sell widgets the way that you do, and our value increases. But it seems like in the public sector, we've moved away where the measurement or the incentive is reducing risk rather than there being an incentive to actually solving, in the case of policing, solving crime, or responding to crime. It's not how can we get out faster? How can we you know, reduce the violence? Um, because the only way to reduce the violence is you need to get out there and solve violence. But then as a system, we're putting more barriers in place to do that.
Mm.
And so that's the bureaucracy, and it's how do you navigate these barriers that we've ultimately put in front of ourselves, both with, you know, sometimes it's out of our control and it's a judgment that came in a court hearing. I'll give you an example that we're all dealing with in Canada, and it's a Jordan. I don't know if you've heard of the Jordan case law that we have here, but it's essentially in about 2016, there was a court ruling that came out that said, no matter what, from now on, from the moment you've been charged with an offense, you have 18 months that you have to get through provincial court to the end of your sentence. Like it's taking way too long. The system's bogged down. You have 18 months. And it's right. We're all like, this isn't fair to the person who's being charged. It's taken them way too long to get their day in court. It's also not fair to the victim and the victim's families because it's taking too long for them to see justice and learn the details of the investigation and all of that. It's not fair of all the participants in it either because, you know, I worked on this file, you know, years ago, and now I'm having to go and try to give evidence on it. And it's, you know, it's not the most efficient use of anybody's time and getting the best quality of work out of anything. So they made that rule. So we're like, okay, great. But then there was no more investment after that.
Mm.
And so it's like you inside the system, we all agree, everybody agrees that this is taking too long to get people to trial. And so then you put a number on it, great. But then you didn't do anything to speed things up. I didn't see any new judge hires, no courthouses being built, you know, no efficiency directors being hired to come in and cut through some of the legal nonsense that's been created and all of that. Instead, it was just this arbitrary time. So then what does it result in? A whole bunch of stay of proceedings because they can't make it to trial in the given time. And so then they just rule, well, you can't make it in 18 months, it's done. And so then that doesn't benefit anybody because now you're just letting people get away with not having their day in court and not being held accountable if they're guilty. And then you have victims, on the other hand, who now feel that the system's failed. You have people working in the system that you feel like the system's failed. And yet this was a barrier now that we put in front of ourselves. And so that would be an example of one that's out of our control. In order to navigate the bureaucracy from within is you have to just keep driving forward. You have to hold your leaders accountable. You have to take them to task. If it's a good idea, if it's a good initiative, you don't just send one memo and forget about it. When you see them in the hallway, you have to remind them, hey, did you get a chance? Because they're busy and they're trying to prioritize their day. And the most important thing in your life isn't the most important thing in their life. but we
Right.
have to remember, but you have to remember, who is it that we actually are working for? Are you working for the system? And so is everything on your desk in there working for the system? Or is there something on this pile that is actually going to have a dramatic impact to the human beings and the people that we're here to serve? Because that's what should move to the top. And so if there's an investigative technique that we know has a high likelihood of solving this crime or on a historical case, for example, then we need to do everything in our power to advocate to get that up to the top of the priority list of your police service. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's just being a pain in the ass. And I think I'm a big pain in the ass to a lot of my managers, but I also know that I have a lot of their respect because I do often get to do the techniques that I've asked for, but it just, takes a bit of effort to get there sometimes.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head. You're respected because how can you not respect someone who's trying to do the right thing, who's trying to do it for the right motives? You're not just making noise or being a pain just to be a pain. There's a reason for it, and there's a good reason for it. So
Mhm.
so that led nicely into a question that I had. Is where do you see, and it can go wider than homicide investigations. So where do you see homicide investigations or public safety as a whole needing the most innovation? Because
Uh, great,
you're right.
great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And I think like policing in general, public institutions in general are pretty slow to evolve. It seems like oftentimes we're the last to get the new cool piece of technology that's out there. I actually remember when I was in the drug unit, or drug and organized crime unit back in like 2009, 2010, when I got there, and I'm meeting with informants, and they're giving me their phone numbers, and I'm writing this down on a piece of paper, that a notebook I'm keeping in my drawer, and I'm like, well, hang on a second, like Blackberries and smartphones exist. Everyone else has them. No one else in our building has. So I had to end up writing an issue paper and jumping through all these hoops, and it took a substantial amount of time, but I helped our service actually bring the first Blackberries in to our unit, so we could safely store this really risky data that we're just keeping in this old school system. Um, so yeah, I think we really need to embrace technology, and it's hard for right now with the artificial intelligence boom. Um, it's moving at a rapid pace, and I think it's so important that our public institutions kind of try to get away from that mindset of this is scary, and we need to always err on the side of caution, and let's just observe and then be the last one to get it, because then by the time you're now making an investment, it's already obsolete and old. We need to change our philosophy and our mindset and our evaluation structure as leaders. Um, and so I think we need to embrace it. I saw that, like I mentioned at the start, warrant writing to me has become a passion, because I learned very early on in my career that if you want to solve things, especially in Canada, I think we need warrants. We need more warrants, I think, for certain things than they do in the United States. But the United States isn't far off as well, with how many warrants they're getting, and companies starting to say no to the police where they used to, cooperate without needing judicial authorization.
Mhm.
And so I've written well over 200, 250 warrants and information to obtain warrants and throughout my career, ranging from wiretaps down to just basic search warrants, etc. And as soon as I saw AI start to take off, I was like, whoa, because it takes me, a very good experienced warrant writer with hundreds under my belt, where I can look at an investigation. I know the important stuff. If I want to get into this house to look for this piece of evidence, I know what I need to include in this from experience. And it might take me 4 or 5 hours to write.
Mhm.
With the introduction of artificial intelligence, someone like me could do this in 5, 10 minutes. And
Right.
that's a direct cost savings to your police service. And so I partnered up with a friend of mine who's a programmer in the AI space, and said, like, hey, this is a problem that I think police need a solution for, and let's build something. So yeah, if people are interested, they can go to Affiant.ai and take a look at what we've started to build there. But I think it's going to be the future of law enforcement is incorporating this technology to make our job more efficient and actually saving money because police budgets are ballooning. So the question ends up being, do you hire more cops or do you let the cops you have be able to do more in their day? And I think we need to start looking at that.
Yeah. So true. You mentioned the cost of doing business, and it's astonishing to me and disappointing. And I'm not suggesting that I have the answer. I think you've alluded to some of the strategies that we can use going forward, embracing the technology, embracing the technology boom, right? But we work as an organization, IHIA. We work with a lot of other we're a nonprofit. We work with a lot of other nonprofits, and we talk about them at our various training events. One of the greatest challenges that investigators and agencies have is financial. It's they can't afford this various testing. The testing that needs to be done on this case, or this certain type of testing needs to be done in this circumstance, and they don't have the money. And so there's nonprofits, and kudos to them for filling that gap, where not they can sometimes supply that funding for an agency if they don't have the money. But the point that I wanted to make, and that you kind of touched on, is how sad is it that we in the public safety profession, working for governmental agencies, that we can't just go and pay for the things we need to pay for to get testing done, or to acquire this certain tool or evidence or information, that we have to fight a budget battle. I mean, it's frustrating because you did, years ago you didn't ever consider that. Maybe I was just naive. Early in my career, you never thought about budgets and those things, but for us to stay on the front edge, the tip of the spear of the technology that's available and can be leveraged in these investigations to find truth and bring justice, to stay in that space, we have to pay for it. And why should a government agency have to reach out to a nonprofit to get money to solve their case, to tell a family, hey, sorry, I can't get this testing done because our agency can't afford it? I mean, that's it's broken in somewhere in there, and the conversation about what's needed in what's lacking in these investigations, or how do we embrace this technology boom? The financial conversation has to be had.
Yeah. Like right now in our community here, and I think our police expenditure is on par with the rest of the country. The citizens of our city, they're paying about 25 cents of every dollar of their property taxes going to fund the police, and so that is increasing. And I think it's that constant draw on the middle class as well, for these services, and people are getting tired of paying for policing. It is a very expensive thing that we need in our community. It's a public service that's essential, but it is very expensive. And I think that's why we really need to find some innovative leaders that are willing to apply a different model and a different lens to policing, because we switched over. I don't know if you would have been around during this transition. It was before my time, but when we sort of switched over from the police forces to the police services, you might be able to bring some highlight to that transition. But it to me now, the pendulum has sort of swung, where if you actually analyze the unit structure within a police service, and you think about, okay, what is our core business here? If our core business is responding to crime and investigating crime, and if we only put those two things as being the fundamental services that we want our local law enforcement to to do, then we can probably eliminate or at least reevaluate a lot of resources in the building that was kind of set up in these other models where I think we might have thought that we were in the prevention game, but these are socioeconomic issues that drive crime, and the police
Yeah.
can't really change socioeconomic. We don't have the tools to do that. I
Right.
mean, we can make people more comfortable so that they're reporting their crime to us. We can build those relationships, but are we really seeing have we and are we really seeing that return on investment for all of those kind of fluff units, as I would call them? I think it's time to maybe ask ourselves, because I'll tell you what, I could go and play, floor hockey with a bunch of kids, and that's great. And I think we should do that as volunteers, as police officers. Um, but I'll tell you what will build a much bigger bridge with, my Indigenous community members is if I solve all of the horrific crime
Yeah.
that's happening within their community and happening upon them. If I'm allocating that kind of resources, maybe I don't need to host so many dinners and suppers and, some of this other thing where we're trying to show them that we care about you. Well, let's
Yeah.
put our money where our mouth is and care about them by solving what our core model is, and that's solve the crime that is is happening to them.
Yeah. Such a great point. It's the answer isn't always to have more programs. It's to have the right leadership, courageous leadership, as you called it earlier, in place. And that's going to kind of lead me into the closing last few questions here, because it does take an awful lot to stand in the gap between good and evil. It does, and it's I liked how you explained that, shift from police force to police service, and there's a I try and be diligent about using public safety more often than law enforcement as
Right.
just a way of
Right.
explaining what we do. So it's just
Brilliant.
a
Yeah.
paradigm shift, right? But
Language matters. Yeah.
it's important because it is,
Yeah.
if you look at it only as law enforcement, then you're maybe unintentionally removing the public safety aspect of it. There's a reason that we do what we do. We're serving the community. We're responding to their needs. And I love that, the example you gave with the indigenous population, and what's most important to them is solve the crimes that they've been victim of, and that's
Mhm.
more important than some of the other feel good programs that might be out there. But so since we're talking about the standing in the gap and the toll, it does take a toll. I worked in law enforcement for well over 30 years, and had a parallel career in the military. So two lifelong professions, careers in the profession of arms. And so I know and I live some of the unspokens about those two careers. Explain your understanding or your position, and how you would deal with compassion fatigue, or feeling, that feeling of despair that's not uncommon in this line of work. And most people see us as big, tough, strong, because we put on the costume and we go and we play the part. And then when we come home, it's not always easy. We sometimes get tired of solving other people's problems all day, so we ignore our problems in our own family, and that takes a toll. So how can you kind of quantify that compassion fatigue, and avoid, or try and avoid, or becoming cynical, and how do you view that, and how do you deal with it?
Look, I think I think acknowledging that it exists, like you just did, Dave, is incredibly important. I don't think we've even been necessarily acknowledging the existence and the impacts that a career like this can have on frontline workers. Um, where we when what like I know a lot of police services, and mine included, are doing an incredible job at building these health and wellness programs for their employees now. It's incredible to see. So the resources are there. It's just been a long time coming, and one of the things that I've noticed as especially when we think of things like post traumatic stress disorder and PTSD, I think every single police officer, paramedic, um, military personnel, anyone that's dealing with frontline work, you definitely have post traumatic stress disorder, and it will pop up at certain times depending on what's going on in your personal life as well. Um, but there's also a mental armor that you put on, like, we're kinda prepared for that, like, we got into this job because we want to be in there. I love homicide investigations, and I mean, I don't like going to autopsies, but it's a part of my job, and seeing,
Mhm.
a human being, um, as, this is just your body, and that's all that's left of you now. Your spirit has gone to some other realm, or whatever your belief system happens to be. And we're going to find out what happened to this body. And it can seem disturbing, or you dealt with a crisis where something really horrific happened. I got into this job because I wanted to help people when they were going through the worst thing they could ever go through. So I had that mental armor. And I think a lot of my colleagues do as well. What hit me, Dave, is moral trauma, and I didn't expect that. And so,
Mhm.
uh, to me, recently, a couple of years ago, I had there's this investigation, and I can't go into all of the details because we're still trying to fight to keep it going. But essentially, long story short, it was a really horrific gang related violent crime resulting in a murder. And it took a lot of investigative effort, creative techniques, building a ton of relationships with all kinds of different people in the gang world to get cooperation for witnesses and all kinds of things. And at the end of the day, I thought we had an incredible product that we handed the prosecutors. And ultimately, they eventually stayed the charges.
Mm.
And of course, I don't think a lot of people realize that a homicide detective and a victim's family, you become very uh, intermingled. I didn't realize that before I got into before I moved into this office, how important of a role I actually
Mm.
am to these family members. I never realized it. I mean, you're on the phone with moms every day. You're on the phone with dads, brothers, sisters every day. They want to know what happened to their loved one. And so when those charges got stayed by our prosecutors for, those decisions are theirs to make, not mine, it crushed me, because it blew my mind. Like my heart, my soul,
Mhm.
everything just I could not wrap my head around why they would do this. And I didn't think that, like, I was fighting with my managers to, look at another angle. Is there something else we can do here? Like, we're all of us as a whole office, we were all, I think, going through this together. Like, how could this be? And I never really knew what a moral injury was until about a month ago. I came home from work, and sitting at my spot in the supper table, my wife had this book sitting there. Actually, I may as well give a shout out to this author because it came from it's just Betrayal from Within. I didn't never heard
Mm.
of this book. I didn't know moral injury was a thing, and it was just sitting at my spot. I'm like, oh, I think my wife's trying to tell me something here. She's an incredible social worker.
Mhm.
She knows what she's talking about, and clearly she recognized some changes in me that I needed to go and talk to somebody and get some help. And it's taken me down this path of researching and learning about what moral injuries are. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my god, that for me, that is the most negative and hard hitting impact that this career has had on me. It's been a moral trauma when you see that somebody isn't getting justice, or when you see that there's something that you can't do. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
there's been files. There was a time where I got called to the front desk, and somebody had just come in off the street, and I happened to be working our serious assault units. They asked me to go talk to this person, and she went through the most horrific details of this crime, and that she was the victim of. And I knew as she's telling me this that there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about this crime. There just isn't. It was, it was a organized crime group that perpetrated this on her, and I just knew that there, unfortunately, like this, there's, and she also knew, but she just wanted somebody to vent it to. And seeing that this actually happened to this human being, and I could not do something as a police officer to solve this for her was damaging as well. And there's been countless moments like that throughout my career where I'm like, oh, this is why I have a hard time sleeping, and I'll be up at night, and I'm just, this
Mhm.
investigation is spiraling and these conversations are spiraling in my mind, and it's not because of the car crash that I went to. It's not because of this. It's because this, I'm seeing systems letting down these
Right.
humans that I signed up to help. And that's a really unique and interesting walk that I feel like I'm currently on.
Yeah, that's so insightful, and in a perfect way, really, to kind of summarize our conversation. I mean, there's so much more I want to talk about, and before we're done, I want you to give people the opportunity to go and find out about the Finding Mackenzie case, because we didn't get a chance to talk about that, and we
Oh, yeah,
won't
we
because
didn't.
we're already at an hour. But you really summarized everything so well there at the end, talking about moral injuries, because many people go into this line of work for the wrong motivation. I get it. To be, they want to be in control or be in charge or deal with some childhood issue that where they felt powerless or whatever. But the majority of people, I like to think, get into this line of work with altruistic motivations, right? They want to be strong for the weak. They want to help the helpless. They and it's when we have those moral um, injuries, when we don't see things through the way that we expect to or want to, it does have an impact, and I appreciate you touching on that. When we talk about Flint to Flame, way back to the very beginning, it's kind of the whole point of this is to fan the flames of leadership and professionalism and information exchange and bromances too. We can fan the flames of those as well. I have bromances pretty much every time I go to an event. There's somebody there I connect with, and on just just a little bit more personal level than others. And I think that's great because it tells me that there's people out there that care. And you're one of those. And I appreciate that about you, Matt. But if you could just end with this thought, and maybe you've already said it, I don't know. If you could just light one flame for the next generation of investigator or detective or public servant, if you could light one flame for that next generation, how would you do it? What would be the source of that ignition?
Oh, it's so hard. I think you have to find allies. You have to find those like-minded individuals, um, so that you aren't on this pursuit alone. When you connect with somebody, it's kind of like game recognizes game, the line that the kids always say all the time. It's like when a good cop recognizes a good cop, you know immediately. You know when you met someone who their heart is in the right place, and not only is their heart in the right place, but they're willing to actually do something to fix, some of this parts of society. You have to find those like-minded individuals and become a powerhouse amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
Motivate each other, and be there to listen to the struggles they're going through. Share your struggles with others, and I think that's what I would say is find those like-minded change makers within your organization wherever you are, and if that's your pursuit, then you can't do it alone.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I it's just fantastic. What a great way to end, but I'm not going to let you end there because I do want you to just talk, if you can, just in very brief terms about because this is the initial subject that brought us together when we first met was finding Mackenzie, a tremendous investigative effort and persistence and perseverance and tenacity. If you could just, I don't know, in just a minute or so, just kind of just explain what that was about and how people might go and research to get the whole story, because we don't have time to tell the whole story. But that's a it's a really a reflection on the type of person that you are, and one of the whole reasons that we wanted to get you on here and talk to you on the Flint to Flame series was because of the work that you put in and your colleagues put into that investigation, that really tells a lot about your character and your professionalism and what drives you, and maybe a reflection of what your why is, why you continue to do the great things that you do. Would you do that for us as we kind of close things
Yeah,
out?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the file that you're referring to, it's the Mackenzie Trache investigation. So Mackenzie Trache went missing in December of 2020. People can Google; they'll find that there was a Paramount Plus story that was done on her on their Never Seen Again series. I think it's on season 3. I think it was, if I remember correctly. Um, unfortunately, they haven't come back for the follow up because we obviously found Mackenzie, but this was not my this was not a Matt Ingrouille file by any means. This was a team effort where the right people came together at the right time. So it was luckily I like I mentioned about my passion for writing warrants and digging for the details. And when I moved to our homicide section, a good friend of mine, well now a good friend of mine at the time, he was a guy that I always wanted to work with because but I was in kind of the warrant organized crime space. He was in the digital forensics type space. And we always knew of each other and we'd love to chat in the hallways, but it was like, whoa, now we're actually on the same team. What magic's gonna happen here? Um, when I talk about finding those like-minded individuals, he was one of them. And with no ego whatsoever. And so as soon as I got there, he said, Matt, please, I'm busy on these other files. Can you take a look at the Mackenzie Trache one? It's gone cold now. Um, not to say that it was a cold case by any means, but essentially they were out of investigative avenues at this moment in time and haven't got a solution. So this was a few years after she'd gone missing, and I started delving into the file, and I could see where the investigators lay, that they believed that the person responsible was this guy that she kind of lived with on and off. I'll just say that his name's, we'll just call him Danny for the sake of it. I'm changing maybe some details in here because of where the case went. But anyway, so she was, that was the focus of their investigation, but there was no confession from Danny and her body had never been recovered. And so the prosecutions weren't willing to proceed. And so what I did is when I looked at the file, I thought to myself, okay, well, let's pretend he didn't do it. Are there any other possibilities? And I found 4 that existed that could have happened to her. And I investigated thoroughly each individual one of those, and it included writing a lot of search warrants. I wrote warrants for a lot of data out in the world that still existed here, there, and everywhere, getting receipts, tying timelines, and building these timelines together. And after eliminating every other possibility, it brought me back to, no, Danny is the only one. So now we got to figure out, what did he do with her? And so as I was, one day, I'm like, man, I really wish we had, access to his phone still, because the police had once seized it. They had once searched it. In Canada, you're only allowed to ask for a very small search window when you get somebody's phone. It's not, we don't get to just look in the whole phone. We have to write a warrant that's got a very strict search parameters on it. We're only allowed to look at what we're authorized to look at. And so Joel said, well, hang on. And this guy fought his detention orders the whole way. So he got all that evidence back. So we didn't have these phones anymore. So I said, man, if we had his phone, I'm sure we could unlock, with today's technology, a couple years later, we could probably unlock more. And he just thought, well, hang on. When I was a digital forensics guy, I would dump the entire person's contents of their phone onto a hard drive. And then I only give the investigators the part that they're allowed to look at. So I'm like, are you telling me that there's a hard drive in our building that's got his details in it. So we basically went to the back of the tech crimes office, started blowing dust off old hard drives, and we found it. I'm like, okay, nobody look at anything. I got to figure out how I can write a warrant that's going to allow us to
Wow.
enter this. And so, yeah, eventually we did. So we solved the puzzle. We came to the belief system that he put her in his garbage can and put her in the landfill, and that she was picked up and dumped. And so then we had to. The new challenge was, well, is it even feasible to search a landfill? There's been almost no success documented in policing history of landfill searches. And can we get the buy-in for our executives if we come up with a plan? And
Mhm.
so luckily we did. We came up with a robust plan. We had some really incredible police officers from all kinds of different units that were willing to help.
Mhm.
And it ultimately ended in a 91-day search of our landfill. We redesigned the way that landfills are to be searched by police officers in a very new and innovative way. And since then, we've been giving presentations on how landfills should be searched, and now it seems like every few months I'm hearing a new story where somebody replicated our model and has found somebody in a landfill, which gave closure to all those families. So incredible thing to be a part of.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I appreciate you taking the time to share, and it's totally worth it too, for our viewers, that have stuck through this, who will stick through this entirety, because what a great way to end. I know it was kind of in my notes to ask you about at the beginning. I'm kind of glad I waited till the end, because it it, it really, just summarizes and kind of puts a great closing on what's been a really enjoyable interview for me, to spend time. When we met in Niagara Falls, I was busy trying to facilitate. You were busy presenting, and trying to view other presentations, and there just wasn't a whole lot of time for, even for me to sit through your whole presentation on the McKinsey case, and so, this just a little over an hour has been just a real pleasure for me, and to end with that extra effort that you and the other like-minded investigators and teammates and analysts, and just people involved with that investigation. Um, I think you know this. I have a separate, little bit of writing, and kind of a motivational thing that I do on the side, and part of that writing, I'll generally, in most of my articles, I'll make reference to, what can you do to make the world a better place, and be more solution than problem in the world, and what a perfect way just to end our time together, and for people to get a flavor of who Matt Ingrouille is, not Detective Sergeant, not only Detective Sergeant Matt Ingrouille, but Matt, as father, grandfather, husband, as person who really has a heart for people and the community that you serve, and making that world a better place. It's just been a real honor and a privilege to talk with you, Matt. I hope we get the chance to reconnect in person again someday soon. And I will just open it up to you to give any closing remarks that you want to share with our viewers.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. I'd like to just to end with just remember who you work for. Um, you might be paid by, a certain organization or institution, but you got into this job because you wanted to work for the community that you live in. And so just remember that's who you're working for. And if you keep driving forward to do what's right for them, it will work out for you. And you will get some bumps and bruises and scars along the way, as we all do. But if you're on the mission to do right for your community members, and to really work hard for them and for your victims and their families, um, you will have some incredible experiences in your career.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect ending. Thank you, Matt. Just been such a pleasure to connect, and thank you for the generosity of your time and your expertise, and your heart here with us on this latest episode of the Flint to Flame interview series. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll look forward to catching up with you at the next episode. For now, it's Dave Eddy and Detective Sergeant Matt Ingrouille saying so long for now.
It's been an honor. Thank you, Dave. Take care.
Thank you.